I'm about to show you something that will make you angry. That compost pile you've been babysitting for 6 months? The one you turn every week, water religiously, add the perfect mix of kitchen scraps to? It's garbage, literal garbage that's going nowhere. Meanwhile, my neighbor, who doesn't even garden, threw everything in a pile 3 weeks ago: moldy bread, coffee grounds, even pizza boxes, and he's already spreading finished compost in his garden. The difference isn't luck. It's one simple trick that every composting expert knows, but nobody tells beginners. And once you see it, you'll realize you've been doing everything backward. This fix works in 7 days, costs nothing, and will make you better at composting than people who've been doing it for 20 years. Here's what nobody tells you about composting. It's not just throwing kitchen scraps in a pile and waiting. It's a biological system that either works perfectly or fails completely, and the difference between success and failure comes down to 3 variables that most gardeners get catastrophically wrong. And when you get these 3 things right, your compost will heat up within 24 hours, start breaking down within 3 days, and be ready to use in as little as 7 days instead of the 6 months you've been waiting. The first mistake is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And this is where almost everyone fails before they even start. Because compost needs roughly 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen by weight to decompose properly. And when that ratio is off, your pile either sits there doing nothing or turns into a putrid, anaerobic swamp. Carbon-rich materials are your browns, dried leaves, straw, shredded paper, cardboard, and wood chips. These provide energy for the microorganisms doing the actual work of decomposition. Nitrogen-rich materials are your greens, kitchen scraps, grass clippings, coffee grounds, and manure. These provide the protein that microorganisms need to reproduce and multiply. Most gardeners dump way too much nitrogen into their piles because kitchen scraps and grass clippings are convenient and abundant. And what happens is the pile gets slimy, starts to smell like ammonia or rotting garbage, and attracts every fly in a 3-mile radius. Because excess nitrogen without enough carbon to balance it creates anaerobic conditions where the wrong bacteria take over and produce foul-smelling compounds instead of compost. The opposite problem is just as common. You add too many leaves or too much straw, and your pile sits there like a monument for months, barely decomposing at all, because there's not enough nitrogen to feed the organisms that break everything down. The fix is simple but requires discipline. For every bucket of kitchen scraps you add 3 buckets of dried leaves or shredded paper or straw. And if you don't have enough browns stockpiled, stop adding greens until you do. Because a pile that's too high in carbon will simply sit there and decompose slowly, which isn't ideal but isn't a disaster. But a pile that is too high in nitrogen becomes toxic sludge that kills the very organisms you need. Here's the trick that changes everything. Shred your materials before adding them. Because a whole cabbage leaf will take months to break down, but that same leaf shredded into strips will decompose in days. Run leaves through a mower, tear up cardboard into small pieces, chop vegetable scraps with a shovel before adding them to the pile. And suddenly you've accelerated decomposition by weeks because you've increased the surface area that microorganisms can attack. The second mistake is moisture, and this one is even more common because most gardeners either drown their pile or let it dry out completely. Compost organisms need water to survive, but they also need oxygen. And when your pile is too wet, water fills all the air spaces between particles, drives out oxygen, and creates anaerobic conditions where decomposition stops and rotting begins. The smell is unmistakable, sulfurous, putrid, like something died. And when you open that pile, you'll find slimy, blackened material that's essentially pickled instead of composted. On the other hand, if your pile is too dry, the organisms can't function and everything grinds to a halt. You lions have a pile that looks the same 6 months later as it did the day you built it, with crispy leaves and desiccated food scraps that haven't decomposed at all. The perfect moisture level is described as a wrung-out sponge. When you grab a handful of compost and squeeze it, a few drops of water should come out, but it shouldn't drip steadily. And achieving this moisture level isn't about adding water once and forgetting it. It's about actively managing moisture as you build the pile and as it decomposes. When you're building your pile, water each layer as you add it. Do and wait until the end and try to water a 5-foot tall pile, because water will just run down the outside and never penetrate the center. Add a layer of browns, sprinkle water until it's damp. Add a layer of greens, sprinkle more water, and keep alternating. And here's the critical part that nobody explains. As your pile heats up and decomposes, it will dry out, sometimes dramatically. Because a hot compost pile is essentially a biological furnace that's evaporating moisture constantly. So you need to check moisture weekly, especially in the first month when decomposition is most active. Stick your hand into the pile. Pull out a handful from the center, not the surface, and squeeze. If nothing comes out, add water by making holes in the pile with a stake and pouring water down those holes so it reaches the center. If it's soggy, turn the pile to incorporate air and dry it out. And if you're in a rainy climate, cover your pile with a tarp or sheet metal to prevent it from becoming waterlogged. But leave the sides open so air can still circulate. The third mistake is oxygen, and this is the one that separates compost that is ready in weeks from compost that takes months or never finished at all. Because the organisms that create good compost are aerobic, meaning they need oxygen to function. And when oxygen levels drop, they die off and are replaced by anaerobic organisms that create compost so slowly you lines be waiting a year, if it finishes at all. The way you get oxygen into your pile is by turning it, which means physically moving material from the outside to the inside and from the inside to the outside. And this does several things simultaneously. It reintroduces oxygen to feed aerobic organisms. It redistributes moisture so dry spots get wet, and wet spots get air. It moves cooler material from the outside into the hot center where decomposition is most active. And it breaks up clumps and mixes materials so everything decomposes evenly. Most gardeners never turn their piles, or they turn them once every few months, which isn't nearly enough. And the result is a pile that has a hot, active core surrounded by a cold, inactive shell that never fully breaks down. You'll dig into the center and find beautiful, dark, crumbly compost, but the outer layer is still recognizable food scraps and leaves that haven't decomposed at all. The fix is aggressive turning, especially in the first 3 weeks when decomposition is most rapid. Turn your pile every 3 to 4 days for the first 2 weeks, then once a week for the next month. Then once every 2 weeks until it's finished. And yes, this is work. You're physically moving the entire pile with a pitchfork or shovel, which is why most people never do it and why most compost piles take 6 months instead of 6 weeks. But here's what happens when you turn aggressively. Within 24 hours of building a properly balanced pile, the internal temperature will rise to 130 or 140 degrees Fahrenheit as billions of microorganisms start consuming carbon and multiplying exponentially. Within 3 days, the center of your pile will hit 150 to 160 degrees, hot enough to kill weed seeds and pathogens. You can stick a compost thermometer into the center, or just shove your hand 6 inches into the pile and feel the heat radiating out. And if you turn it every 3 to 4 days and maintain proper moisture to carbon to nitrogen ratios, the entire pile will stay at this temperature for 2 to 3 weeks, breaking down even tough materials like vegetable stalks and small branches. After 3 weeks of this hot composting process, the pile will start to cool as the most readily available materials are consumed. And at this point, you shift to turning once a week to keep oxygen flowing while the remaining material finishes breaking down. The pile will continue to shrink and darken, and you lines notice that what started as recognizable kitchen scraps and leaves is now transforming into something that looks and smells like rich forest soil. In 6 to 8 weeks total, you'll have finished compost that looks like dark soil, smells like forest floor, and is ready to spread in your garden. But if you want compost in 7 days, which is possible if you're willing to work for it, here's what you do. Build a large pile all at once, at least 1 cubic yard in size, because smaller piles don't hold heat well enough. The larger the pile, the better it insulates itself and maintains the high temperatures needed for rapid decomposition. Use a perfect 30:1 carbon to nitrogen ratio by weighing or measuring your materials. Shred everything as finely as possible because smaller particles have more surface area for organisms to work on. Water thoroughly as you build, so every layer is at that wrung-out sponge moisture level, and then turn the pile every single day. When you turn daily, you're constantly reintroducing oxygen, redistributing heat, and preventing any part of the pile from going anaerobic. And the result is decomposition so rapid that you can literally watch the pile shrink day by day. Day 1, your pile is hot, maybe 140 degrees in the center. Day 2, it's even hotter, 155 or 160, and you can feel the heat radiating off it when you turn it. On a cool morning, you'll see steam rising from the pile as you fork through it. Day 3, the temperature peaks and the pile has shrunk noticeably, maybe down to 3/4 of its original size. Day 4 and 5, it stays hot but starts to cool slightly as material breaks down. The texture is changing now, becoming less recognizable, more uniform. Day 6, the temperature drops to 120 or 130, and when you grab a handful, it's starting to look like soil instead of recognizable scraps. Day 7, the pile is cool enough to use, dark and crumbly, and you have finished compost in 1 week instead of 6 months. Now, here's why most gardeners will never do this, because it's work. Real physical work that requires commitment and discipline. It's easier to throw scraps in a pile, ignore it for 6 months, and complain that composting doesn't work. But the gardeners who succeed, the ones who have soil so black and rich that people ask what their secret is, are the ones who understand that composting isn't passive. It's active management of a biological system. And when you manage it correctly, the results are almost magical. You transform garbage into the most valuable substance in your garden, you build soil instead of depleting it, and you create a self-sustaining fertility cycle that costs nothing and gets better every year. And here's what nobody tells you about finished compost. It's not just fertilizer. It's a complete ecosystem that you're adding to your soil. Every handful contains billions of beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes that will colonize your garden soil and transform it. It contains humus, which is decomposed organic matter that holds water, and nutrients like a sponge and releases them slowly to plants. It contains enzymes and organic acids that break down minerals in your soil and make them available to plants. And it contains compounds that suppress plant diseases and pests, making your plants healthier and more resistant to problems. When you add finished compost to your garden, you're not just adding nutrients. You're inoculating your soil with life, and that life will persist and multiply, improving your soil year after year. This is why gardeners who use compost consistently for 3 or 4 years have soil that is unrecognizable from where they started. Dark, crumbly, rich with earthworms, and capable of growing vegetables that taste better and are more nutritious than anything you can buy.